We begin our time together, as always, by turning within for just a moment, not to think, not to ask, not even to seek, but simply to be still. For it is in this stillness that the presence makes itself known. And it is from this inner center that all true spiritual instruction must unfold. In our human experience, many of us discover that as the spiritual life begins to awaken within us, something unexpected accompanies it. There comes a sense of aloneness, not loneliness in the ordinary meaning of that word, but a quiet separation from the noise and activity of the world. Some experience it as a withdrawal from old friendships, old interests, even old identities. Others feel it as a gentle inner distance, a recognition that the outer world no longer satisfies as it once did. And often, the mind interprets this as something being wrong. Why do I feel so apart from others? Why do I seem to walk a path that no one around me understands? I want you to know today that nothing is wrong. In fact, something profoundly right is taking place. This sense of aloneness is one of the first signs that the soul is beginning to awaken to its true source. For the spiritual journey is not traveled in crowds or noise. It is traveled in the deep recesses of your own consciousness, where no person can accompany you and no outer influence can disturb you. The moment the spiritual life begins to stir, the soul is gently led away from dependence on the outer world and drawn into the inner sanctuary where the presence resides. This is not a journey of withdrawal from people. It is a journey into a higher awareness where we begin to see the world through spiritual eyes rather than human ones. We are not becoming isolated. We are being prepared to listen, to receive, to recognize that the true companion on this path is not found in the world, but in the infinite presence that walks beside us, within us, and as us. And so, if in recent months or years you have felt this quiet separation, do not interpret it as emptiness. Do not imagine that you are losing something. You are being led inward, where the true riches are found. You are being invited into the silence that becomes the foundation of the spiritual life. You are beginning the same journey that every mystic, every seeker of truth has walked from the beginning of time, the journey from the outer sense of life to the inner realization of God as the core and essence of your being. In the minutes ahead, we will look at why this sense of aloneness appears, what it truly means, and how, when rightly understood, it becomes not a burden, but a blessing. For behind this experience lies the great discovery that you are never alone and never have been. The presence that accompanies you is the only true companionship that exists, and when this is realized, the mind's fear of aloneness dissolves forever. As we enter deeper into this subject of spiritual aloneness, let us consider one of the most misunderstood statements in all of spiritual teaching. Many are called, but few are chosen. To the human mind, this appears to imply favoritism or a selective choosing by some divine authority. But this is never the meaning in the spiritual life. In the spiritual realm, there is no God who selects one and rejects another. There is no divine caprice, no heavenly lottery. In the infinite, all are included, all are embraced, all are one. What then is the meaning of this statement? It is simply this: the call goes out to all, but few are ready to respond to it. The call is not a voice from the sky. It is not an angelic declaration. The call is that quiet inner stirring which comes to every individual at some moment of life, a sense that there must be something more, that the outer world is insufficient, that the heart longs for a peace and a truth that cannot be found in material conditions. Every person feels this at some point. This is the call, but to respond requires a different kind of readiness. It requires a willingness to turn within, to be still, to relinquish the search for satisfaction in outer things, and to trust the silent leading of the Spirit. Not everyone is prepared for this. Many feel the call, but continue living outwardly, postponing the inner life, hoping that peace will come through new circumstances, new possessions, new relationships. The call is felt, but not answered. Those who do respond are not chosen by God. They are those who have chosen to listen. They have chosen to follow the gentle inner prompting rather than the noise of the world. And this choice, this turning within, is what begins the spiritual path. It is not a path imposed from without, but a path discovered in the depths of one's own being. And here lies the reason that spiritual awakening is so often accompanied by a feeling of aloneness. The moment you respond to the call, you step out of the collective current of human thought. You step out of the world's values, the world's pursuits, the world's dependencies. You no longer move with the crowd because you are no longer nourished by the same things that nourish the crowd. You begin to walk, not apart from others, but inwardly ahead of them, guided by a different light, the light of the inner presence. This does not make one superior. It simply means that consciousness has become receptive to a higher impulse. It means that something within you has awakened to the recognition that your good cannot come from the world, but only from God realized within. When this shift takes place, the outer life often begins to feel strangely distant. Conversations lose their meaning. Activities that once brought pleasure fall flat. People who are central to your life may no longer feel aligned with the direction your consciousness is moving. And the mind, not yet accustomed to this new dimension, interprets this change as isolation. But it is not isolation. It is unfoldment. You are not being separated from others. You are being prepared for a deeper union, a union that begins with the recognition of your own oneness with the infinite. This is why, in the early stages of spiritual development, the path feels solitary. It is not because few are called, but because few are ready to go within deeply enough to hear and to follow the guidance that the call brings. Once you understand this, you will not fear this aloneness. You will recognize it as the sign that the Spirit has drawn you inward, away from the world's distractions, so that you may come into conscious contact with the presence that has been with you from the beginning. As we continue our meditation on this subject, let us gently observe a truth that becomes evident to every sincere seeker. The moment the inner light begins to dawn, the world appears to grow dim. This is not because the world has changed, but because you have. The faculties by which you lived have been touched by Spirit, and what once satisfied you no longer suffices. In the human experience, our sense of identity is built upon outward things, relationships, occupations, accomplishments, past memories, and future expectations. These form the fabric of the personal life. But when the spiritual awakening begins, this fabric quietly loosens. You discover, sometimes to your surprise, that the desires which once drove you no longer hold the same power. The conversations that once stirred you now leave you empty. The activities that once entertained you no longer nourish your heart. This is the beginning of that sense we call isolation, but it is not isolation in the spiritual sense. What is happening is that consciousness is turning away from the surface of life and beginning to listen to the deeper currents within. You are not withdrawing from people, you are withdrawing from dependence upon the outer realm. And as this takes place, the mind begins to feel uncertain, even confused, because it cannot yet interpret the change. The mind says, "Why do I feel separate? Why has life grown quieter? Why have people drifted away? But the soul whispers, you are being led inward. This transition is as natural as a seed growing beneath the soil, unseen yet fully alive. No one sees the seed's transformation, yet something miraculous is occurring. So it is in your consciousness. The roots of your being are reaching deeper. The soul is drawing nourishment from a new source. And until this inner foundation is established, there will be a sense of being between worlds, not fully at home in the outer, and not yet fully awakened to the inner. This is not a failing. It is the necessary passage every mystic has walked. For the spiritual path does not begin with fullness, it begins with emptiness, a clearing away of what is no longer true so that the truth may be revealed. As consciousness awakens, you begin to perceive life differently. You look at the world and feel a compassion you did not know before. You see fear where others see anger, innocence where others see guilt, unity where others see division. And because this vision is not yet shared by those around you, it may seem as though you live in a different atmosphere, breathing a different air. But you are not alone in this atmosphere. You are simply becoming aware of a dimension that was always present, but previously hidden. Goldsmith often taught, when you awaken out of the world, not out of people, but out of the world's belief in separation. And this awakening, though it may feel solitary, is the very doorway into companionship with the infinite. Human companionship, as precious as it is, can never take the place of the inner assurance that comes from knowing that I and the source of my being are one. Until this assurance is felt, the soul walks gently, sometimes quietly, sometimes even with a sense of being misunderstood. But all of this is temporary. The loneliness is not a condition, it is an indication that the old identity is dissolving and the new identity, rooted in spirit, is emerging. Therefore, let us not resist this phase. Let us not try to fill it with noise or activity. Let us not seek to recreate the outer pleasures of yesterday. Instead, let us rest in the recognition that this sense of isolation is the spirit's way of loosening our grip on the external, so that the internal may reveal its presence. As the outer world grows quieter, the inner world becomes clearer, and soon we begin to discover that this aloneness is not loneliness at all, it is the silence of God preparing to speak. As we move further into this contemplation, let us open ourselves to a truth that is central to the spiritual life. True companionship is not found in the outer world, but in the realized presence within. The unfolding of this truth marks one of the most delicate transitions on the path, a transition from seeking support, comfort, or understanding from the world to discovering that all of this has its source in the infinite that dwells at the center of your being. In the ordinary human sense of life, companionship is measured by human relationships, family, friends, colleagues, communities. And while these relationships have their rightful place, they are not the foundation of spiritual living. They cannot be, for anything built upon persons, conditions, or circumstances is subject to change. And what is subject to change cannot be the rock upon which the soul establishes its peace. When the spiritual call is answered, the first thing we notice is that this dependence begins to dissolve not through effort, not through renunciation, but through a quiet inner recognition that the peace we have sought from others has never truly come from them. It has always come from the presence that speaks in the silence of our own being. Others may have been the occasion through which love seemed to flow, but they were never the source. And when this realization dawns, something profound happens. We stop looking outward for what can only be found inward. This is the beginning of inner companionship. At first, it may feel as though something is being taken away. people drift, interests shift, conversations no longer nourish. The mind interprets this as loss, but in truth, nothing is being taken from you. Rather, something greater is being revealed to you, the eternal presence that has always lived at the center of your consciousness, quietly waiting for your recognition. Goldsmith would often say, when you make God your companion, you discover that you have never walked alone. This is not poetry, it is spiritual fact. For the presence that formed you, sustains you, and lives as your very life cannot abandon you, cannot distance itself from you, cannot separate itself from its own expression. The only veil that ever existed was the belief that you must find fulfillment in the outer realm. And when this veil begins to lift, the inner realm becomes luminous. This transition does not ask you to reject anyone. It does not require solitude or withdrawal. What it does require is recognition. Recognition that God is the true companion, the true support, the true comfort, the true intelligence guiding every step of your journey. And once this recognition takes root, even relationships in the outer world take on a different quality. They are no longer relationships of need or dependency, but relationships of shared being, where each person is seen as an expression of the one life. It is in this stage of unfoldment that silence becomes sweet, not empty. Quiet moments become rich, not barren. Solitude becomes a sanctuary, not a void. For you begin to sense, sometimes faintly and sometimes with great clarity, the living presence that accompanies you. This presence does not speak in words, but in assurance. It does not answer with explanations, but with peace. And in this peace, you discover that you have entered into a companionship that is deeper than any human relationship, because it is not dependent upon form, it is dependent solely upon realization. Let us understand, then, that the feeling of aloneness is not the disappearance of companionship, but the reorientation of companionship from the outer to the inner, from the changing to the unchanging, from the personal to the infinite. And once this shift is made, you will find that you can walk through the world with others, yet never lose the companionship of the presence that goes before you, prepares the way, and fulfills every need before you ask. This is the companionship that the spiritually awakened soul discovers. It is the realization of the Christ within. And when this comes, the soul knows that it has found the true foundation upon which all of life must be lived. Let us turn our attention now to a phenomenon that every earnest seeker will eventually encounter: the discovery that one's inner unfoldment seems to move ahead of the general consciousness of the world. This, too, contributes to the sense of aloneness on the spiritual path. But again, when rightly understood, it is not loneliness at all. It is simply the nature of spiritual awakening. The spiritual life never unfolds in crowds. It never awakens collectively. It awakens individually, one consciousness at a time, like lamps being lit in the night. There comes a moment when something within you begins to see differently, feel differently, interpret life differently. You find yourself perceiving a unity where others still see division, a peace where others feel conflict, a spiritual reality behind the appearance of material conditions. And because this inner sight is not yet common to those around you, it may seem as though you walk ahead quietly, almost invisibly guided by a light that others do not yet perceive. But this does not make you special. It does not make you chosen in the human sense. It simply means that your consciousness has become receptive to a deeper reality. You are responding to the call that many have heard but have not yet turned inward to follow. And that response naturally places you in a different relationship with the world. You may find that old conversations no longer engage you. You may feel that you stand apart from the fears, the conflicts, the anxieties that occupy the human mind. You may sense that your values are shifting, that peace is now more important than argument, that harmony means more than being right, that truth is more compelling than tradition. This shift is not something you engineer. It happens naturally as consciousness awakens to the presence of God within. Because of this, you may feel ahead of your surroundings, not ahead in superiority, but ahead in awareness, ahead in sensitivity, ahead in your ability to recognize the unreal nature of fear, discord, and limitation. The collective human consciousness may still be absorbed in shadows, while something within you has caught a glimpse of the light behind those shadows. This spiritual sensitivity has a purpose. It is the preparation for service, not service in the sense of doing, but service in the sense of being. For when you have risen into a higher conviction of the presence, you carry an atmosphere with you. That atmosphere becomes a blessing to the world, even when no words are spoken. Goldsmith reminded us that the consciousness of truth in one individual becomes the light of the world. And it becomes the light precisely because it is not dependent on outer conditions. To walk ahead in consciousness is simply to walk with transparency to truth. You see what others have not yet seen, and you love them precisely because you understand that their fear, their resistance, their misunderstanding is only temporary. They are not separate from God. They are simply not yet aware of their union with the infinite. And when this realization becomes clear to you, compassion takes the place of judgment. You do not feel superior. You feel responsible not to teach, not to convince, but to maintain your awareness of the presence. This quiet awareness becomes your ministry, whether or not you speak of it. Everywhere you go, you carry with you a consciousness of peace, of safety, of assurance, and even when others do not understand what you understand, they feel something in your presence. They feel the calm, the non-reaction, the absence of fear. This is what it means to walk ahead. You walk as one who has seen behind the veil and therefore cannot be disturbed by the play of shadows. But walking ahead is never walking alone. It is walking with the presence. It is walking with the inner assurance that you are guided, sustained, and upheld by the infinite. And while others may not accompany you outwardly, they are included within your consciousness of oneness. You carry them not as persons, not as separate beings, but as part of the same infinite life that animates your own existence. Thus, what appears at first as isolation becomes, in truth, the recognition of unity at a level deeper than human understanding. You are not ahead to distance yourself from others. You are ahead to see more clearly the truth that will eventually be revealed to all. As we continue unfolding this theme, we come now to one of the most sacred truths in the spiritual life, the discovery of silence as the doorway to divine companionship. It is here, perhaps more than anywhere else, that the sense of aloneness begins to dissolve and the reality of the presence begins to dawn, not as a belief, not as a hope, but as a living experience. In the human sense of life, silence is often associated with emptiness, with absence, with the lack of something. But in the spiritual life, silence is fullness. It is the atmosphere in which the presence makes itself known. It is the womb of spiritual realization. And until we become comfortable indeed, at home, in this silence, we cannot fully understand the meaning of divine companionship. You see, as long as we look to the world for our sense of connection, our sense of identity, or our sense of support, we cannot hear the gentle whisper of the Spirit. The world speaks loudly, the Spirit speaks softly. And until the outer noise subsides, both the noise around us and the noise within us, the inner voice remains unheard. This is why, in the earliest stages of awakening, the soul is led into what feels like solitude. It is not punishment, it is preparation. The Spirit is preparing a space within your consciousness where something higher may enter, and this space must be quiet, quiet of fear, quiet of desire, quiet of striving, quiet of expectation. Only in this quietude can the presence register. Goldsmith often said, "In the silence, God becomes real." He did not mean that God becomes real in the sense of coming into being. God is always real. What happens is that our awareness of God becomes clear, unobstructed, unclouded by human thinking. In this silence, you begin to feel, not imagine, not believe, but feel the presence of an infinite love that watches over you, moves through you, sustains you. At first, it may be subtle, a warm assurance, a quiet sense of release, an absence of fear. Later, it becomes unmistakable. You begin to know that you are never alone, not because someone told you so, but because the presence has revealed itself in the very depth of your being. This revelation does not come through effort. It comes through receptivity. It does not come through words or thoughts. It comes through stillness. And it is in this stillness that divine companionship becomes more real than any human relationship could ever be. For human relationships may falter, may change, may come and go, but the presence that reveals itself in silence is eternal, unchanging, closer than breathing, nearer than hands and feet. Many seekers misunderstand silence. They approach it as a technique, as something to practice for results. But silence is not a technique. It is a state of consciousness. It is the recognition that nothing needs to be added, nothing needs to be sought, nothing needs to be changed. God is already here. And when you enter the silence with that recognition, not as a thought, but as a resting, then the presence that has always been there becomes evident. It may reveal itself as peace. It may reveal itself as joy. It may reveal itself as a sense of safety. It may reveal itself simply as the absence of fear. But whatever form it takes, it is always the same presence, the same I that is the core of your being. And once you have touched this inner companionship, you will never again believe that your well-being depends upon outer conditions. You will never again feel the same sense of abandonment or isolation, because you will know that the infinite walks with you, lives as you, and goes before you in all things. Thus, silence is not an empty space. It is the meeting place between the human and the divine. It is the moment when the personal sense yields to the infinite. And in that moment, whether it lasts a second or an hour, you know what Goldsmith meant when he said, "Where the presence is realized, there is peace." The gift of silence is that it reveals the only true companionship you will ever need. The companionship of God realized as your own being. And once this realization has touched you, even briefly, you are never again truly alone. As we stay within this atmosphere of stillness, let us look now at a beautiful truth that unfolds naturally on the spiritual path after the soul has discovered inner companionship with the presence. Outer companionship returns, but in a new form, on a higher level, free from dependence and fear. Many seekers fear the sense of aloneness that accompanies the beginning of their awakening. They imagine that the spiritual life will require them to walk apart from the world forever. But this is not the case. The period of solitude is only temporary. It is a preparation, not an ending. When you no longer rely on the world for your peace, when you no longer seek from others what only God can provide, when your heart has tasted the sufficiency of the presence, then outer companionship begins to reappear. But now, it is no longer a relationship of need. It is a relationship of sharing. It is no longer driven by fear of loss, fear of abandonment, or fear of rejection. Instead, it flows from the fullness of what you already are. You see, it is only the empty cup that grasps for relationships. The cup that is full spills over. And in the spiritual life, that overflow becomes the basis of true relationship. Goldsmith would often remind us that when we no longer cling to the outer returns not as a source, but as an expression. When God is recognized as the one true companion, all human companionship becomes a form through which his love may be expressed, but never the foundation upon which our peace depends. In this higher form of companionship, you no longer look to others to complete you, because you are already complete in God. You no longer require agreement or validation, because your identity is established in the presence within. You no longer fear the loss of anyone, because you know that all companionship is God, companionship appearing in infinite forms. You no longer bind others with expectations, because you see them as expressions of the same infinite life that animates you. And so, when companionship returns, it returns purified, it returns free, it returns sanctified by the recognition that the only real relationship in this world is the relationship between God and God, between the infinite appearing as one individual and the infinite appearing as another. Human relationship becomes beautiful only when it rests upon this truth. When you see the Christ, the divine identity in another, you are no longer relating to a mortal with opinions, fears, and desires. You are relating to the same presence that you have found within yourself. And this recognition forms the basis for a relationship that cannot be broken, because it is not built upon personality. It is built upon spiritual identity. This is why, after the period of spiritual solitude, many discover that new relationships enter their lives, relationships marked by depth, authenticity, and a quiet inner harmony. These are not relationships formed through effort. They arise naturally, drawn by the activity of the presence within you. And when old relationships return, they too are transformed, because you no longer bring the old consciousness to them. This does not mean that every human relationship becomes perfect. The spiritual path does not erase personalities, but your experience of relationship is transformed. You no longer look to others to give you what only God can supply. And because you do not seek to extract anything from anyone, you no longer suffer from unmet expectations. Your love becomes unconditional, not because you try to love unconditionally, but because the source of your love is unconditional. This is the meaning of companionship, renewed at a higher level. Human ties become expressions of divine love, rather than substitutes for it. And so, when companionship returns, it does not replace your inner solitude, it complements it. You are able to be with others without losing yourself. You are able to love others without fear. You are able to walk among the world without forgetting the presence that walks within you. This is the fruit of the spiritual life. First the inner companionship, then the renewed outer companionship. First the silence, then the harmony. First the aloneness, then the realization that you have never truly been alone. As our contemplation deepens, Let us look now at what it means to live beyond loneliness, not by filling the outer life with activity, but by resting in the consciousness of one presence. By the time the soul has walked through the periods of quiet, of aloneness, of inner transition, something subtle but transformative has taken place. You have begun to sense that the presence, which once seemed far away, is, in truth, the very life of your own being. And when this realization begins to dawn, loneliness is gently dissolved, not by effort, but by understanding. Loneliness is a belief in separation. It is the belief that there is me here and God somewhere else, me here and others somewhere out there. But you see, there is no such separation in God. God is indivisible. God is infinite. And because God is infinite, there can be nothing outside of God, not you, not your neighbor, not the so-called stranger. There is only one life, expressing itself as infinite individualities. When this is understood, even faintly, the idea of being alone loses its meaning. Goldsmith often said that the spiritual life is not a journey of becoming something, it is a journey of recognizing what already is. And what already is the truth that you live, move, and have your being in God, and God lives, moves, and expresses as you. When that realization becomes even partially conscious, loneliness cannot remain, for loneliness belongs only to the sense of a separate self, and as the sense of a separate self dissolves, so does its loneliness. This does not mean that the spiritual individual becomes emotionally detached or withdrawn from life. On the contrary, one becomes more deeply connected not through dependency, but through recognition. When you look at another, you begin to see not a person with a private life and a private mind, but the same divine life which animates you. You begin to see the presence expressing itself in every face, behind every form, in every circumstance. And wherever the presence is recognized, loneliness is impossible, for you are beholding the same life everywhere. Living beyond loneliness means resting in this awareness. God is here. God is now. God is the very essence of all being. It means knowing that the one who walks with you in silence walks with all others in the same silence. You are not apart from life, nor is life apart from you. You are included in the infinite, and therefore you are eternally companioned. In this state, the need for external reassurance fades. You no longer look outward to see who stands with you, because you know that the invisible presence stands with you always. And when this presence is recognized, human relationships become richer, not poorer. You can meet others without fear, without the need to grasp, without the dread of losing. Because, God is the companionship. God is the love. God is the support. God is the fulfillment. And so you begin to live from a center that is whole. You meet life from a consciousness that is full. You rest in a peace that the world cannot give and cannot take away. The spiritual journey has brought you to the realization of oneness, and that realization is the end of loneliness. But know this, the peace you experience is not something you have achieved. It is something you have uncovered. It was always present, always available, always your true nature. Loneliness was the dream. Oneness is the reality. And now, as consciousness expands, you begin to live from that reality, not occasionally, not only in meditation, but more and more as the natural state of your being. To live beyond loneliness is to walk through the world with an inner assurance. I and the presence are one, and this presence is all that truly is. From this assurance flows a serenity that no circumstance can disturb. From this assurance flows a love that does not fluctuate. From this assurance flows a companionship that is eternal. This is the fruit of the spiritual path. This is the gift awaiting every soul, and once tasted, it becomes the ground upon which you walk, the air you breathe, the quiet strength that accompanies you in all things. As we bring this period of meditation and reflection to its close, let us pause again for a moment of quiet, not to conclude anything, not to summarize, but to simply rest in the awareness that the presence we have been speaking of is here. Not because of any words that have been spoken, not because of any teaching or idea, but because it has always been here. Our time together has only opened the window through which we may glimpse what has been true from the beginning. Let us rest, then, in the silent recognition. Right where I am, God is. Not as a concept, not as a belief, but as the very life that beats the heart, breathes the breath, and sustains existence without effort. Throughout this contemplation, we have touched upon the experience of spiritual aloneness, the feeling that accompanies the soul when it begins to turn inward, when it begins to hear the call of the infinite. And we have seen that this aloneness is not a condition to fear, but a sign of spiritual birth. It is the gentle drawing of the Spirit, leading you away from dependence on the outer world so that it may reveal itself as your true companion. We have seen that this period of solitude is temporary, and more than temporary, it is purposeful. For only when the heart no longer seeks outside of itself can it discover the fullness within. And when that fullness is felt, even lightly, loneliness dissolves, because the sense of separation dissolves. The soul awakens to the truth that the presence is not something you reach for, it is something you recognize. As this recognition deepens, companionship returns first as inner assurance, then as outer harmony. You begin to walk through the world with a quiet confidence, knowing that you are never without support, never without guidance, never without love. The presence that goes before you prepares the way. The presence that walks with you sustains you. The presence that lives as you expresses itself in ways the human mind can never plan or predict. Let this awareness be your resting place. You are not alone. You cannot be alone, for the infinite cannot divide itself, cannot abandon its own expression, cannot be absent from any point of its creation. As we close, let us return once more to silence, not to end the experience, but to let the presence speak where words can no longer reach. In this silence, let the truth settle in your being. Where I am, God is, and that is companionship enough. May this awareness go with you as you rise from meditation. May it accompany you through your daily tasks. May it walk before you into every encounter, and may it remind you again and again that all is well, because all is God. Let us rest now for just a breath in the peace that requires no explanation and no effort, the peace that is the very nature of the presence within.